the ball. Now the ball's over there. That man has it now. That's an interesting development.
Alright then, you knew it was coming. DnDgate. Let's talk about that. Of course, it should be RPG Gate, but for whatever reason, the RPG Pundit decided to go with DnDgate, possibly because of brand recognition, I suppose, and afraid of confusion with computer games. But still, it's a thing. It shouldn't really be a thing. It shouldn't have become a thing. We had a kind of mini RPG Gate during Gamergate, but it never really got any traction, similar to Metalgate and so on. Honestly, the problems, the non-specific problems that are existing across geek media have long been a problem in tabletop RPGs, much longer than they have in computer games and so on. To the extent that that fight, I think, is essentially lost. We could use a DnDgate or an RPG Gate, but it's very different. Gamergate, while it existed in a context, a broader context of shit that had been going on for ages, corruption, censorship, entryism by social justice warriors, the regressive left, whichever term you prefer, try not to get turned off by language and concentrate on the points that I'm making, yeah? But it was eventually set off by a particular singular event, in that an indie game publisher, literally who, had been fucking her way around the indie games and games journalism scene, and one guy in particular, perhaps more than one, had given her glowing write-ups. There may or may not have been any actual corruption, but the point was that this relationship that they had, that, you know, conceivably and reasonably might bias any coverage that he gave her, wasn't declared. So it genuinely was an issue with ethics in games journalism that set it all off, with the secondary issues of censorship and politicisation. There has been no event like that in role-playing games. We don't really have an RPG media. It doesn't even pretend to be professional. There are no magazines. There are no really professional news sites. There's places like EN World, RPGNet, heavily moderated, but not really professional. You know, there isn't anyone who is an RPG reporter who has that as a beat that they cover that really gets any kind of salaried employment out of it. It's all very hobbyist, very part-time. Yeah, no one makes a pretense to professionalism, and you know, it's par for the course to get given material in order to review it and so on. Some people disclose, some people don't. It's not such a big issue as in computer games, which, you know, is a multi-$100 billion business at this point. It's bigger than Hollywood, you know. When that amount of money and the power that that money represents is being thrown around, it's a much bigger issue, and ethical issues are much bigger of a problem. So not to minimise the issues in the tabletop arena, but it's just nowhere near on the scale, and it doesn't have quite the same context. It does have some similar context, however. Computer games have been demonised and hounded, and the model used to go after them in many ways was the same as that had before been used to go after role-playing games, and before that horror comics, and before that rock and roll, and probably way before that the wheel or fire. It's just it's cyclic. This happens over and over again. Anything new or different, people demonize and try to ban and control and censor. In the past, this came from the religious right and conservative busybodies when it comes to computer gaming and tabletop gaming, and naive little me, I thought this would have effectively inoculated the tabletop gaming scene against people who wanted to censor and control people's expression within that venue, but apparently not. Now it's conservatism with a small c, coming from people who style themselves as the left but do not conform to any left-wing philosophy that I recognise, who are now trying to censor and control games. It's much more similar to what's going on with Comicsgate. While there have been scandals and issues, it's a general disgruntlement in a large part of the comics buying community who do not like the constant deconstruction and postmodern approach to heroes. They want heroic stories. They don't like politics being crammed down their throat. They feel like a lot of the themes and characters are being diluted, changed, replaced, rather than new material being added on. So it's more similar to that in that we have this overall atmosphere of censoriousness and judgment, over moderation on forums and so on. It's just a general oppressive is too strong a word, but oppressive atmosphere. And we do need pushback to that. We already have it to an extent. You know, you have people like me who just like making controversial topics in their games because they find them interesting. Sometimes that's even political. So it's not politicization per se, it's it being rammed down your throat constantly, or people insisting that every game must be interpreted through a political lens, that if you don't have the requisite number of illustrations depicting people of colour in your historically accurate RPG based in, I don't know, Bohemia or whatever, like Daniel Vavra's computer game, if you don't have sufficient people of colour in that, then somehow you're being racist. Or if you want to depict the full sexist horror of the way women were treated throughout much of history and you put that into your game, that must somehow necessarily mean that you're condoning and supporting that. It doesn't make any sense. Or if your villain is a rapist or a torturer or a child molester or whatever else, because, you know, he's a fucking villain, somehow that reflects upon you as an author, and you shouldn't put these themes in there. And this manifests itself in all sorts of weird ways, like sympathy for the orc and all this nonsense. But what bugs me the most is that it didn't need to be a thing, but because people reacted so violently to what, well, not even to what Pundit was saying, but to things that they imagined he was saying, when in fact it was the entire opposite. You know, they're accusing him of trying to gatekeep the hobby, to exclude LGBT or whatever other people, when all he's saying is, look, to be in the hobby you need to play the game, railing against people who are kind of like hangers-on, you know, a baggage train behind the actual hobbyists, people who only watch Twitch streams or whatever. I don't share his concerns, but I do share a concern about the gatekeeping that's going on, the insistence that your table be political, the interference in your work as an author, as a games master, as a player, making these expectations of you, nonsense like X cards, the ridiculous over-moderation on forums so you can't have even a mildly heated discussion about something that you're passionate about without being banned. You know, the lies that get bandied about around people, God knows what they've inflated into about me by this point. All of this stuff, it controls on art. The anti-harassment policies, which aren't anti-harassment policies, they're censorship policies by the back door, but if you object, somehow you're suggesting that harassment is okay when nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I'm concerned about how these policies and things might be used in order to harass and censor people, because they make all kinds of pronouncements about what kinds of displays and books and whatever else you can put up there. So we do have a problem, but I think the best way to go about it is more the Comicsgate model, and it's already what a lot of people do in the tabletop role-playing scene, is just make your own shit. Let them have their corner of the hobby, and go off and make your own stuff, and that should and would be the end of it, except for the fact that these social justice warriors want to censor and control what everyone else makes, what everyone else plays, what they sell. You know, they've successfully censored material of mine, of Avengers, of other people's, and there wasn't sufficient fuss, I don't think, raised about that, but I would think that, because I was the target. It's just, and so much of it is based on hearsay and nonsense and misinterpretation, but your intent doesn't seem to matter. So if it wasn't for them constantly interfering, we could basically subdivide into almost two different hobbies and never the twain shall meet. But at the table, none of these differences, these political differences and so on, should matter worth two spits anyway. You're there to play the game. Things like X cards interfere with that. things like going after your sales points interfere with that. I mean, in the computer games world, Steam has just said, fuck it, publish it, whatever. We're not going to gatekeep like that anymore. It would be good if somewhere like Drive-Thru made that same similar stance and allowed people to produce horrifying and adult content. I don't have to defend the content in order to defend the principle of free expression. People should be able to publish things I don't like, and that seems to be the fundamental difference between the two camps here. I don't want gaming gatekept on political or social issues by anyone. I don't want conservatives excluded from the table, even though I'm as far from a conservative as you can get. I don't want liberals barred from the table. I don't want gay people barred from the table. I don't want heterosexual people barred from the table. I don't want cisgender or trans people barred from particular tables. As long as you're there to play a game, that is all that should matter. That is what makes us a community, our common interest. When you sit down to play, you're there to play. So I just think we need to concentrate on building the genuinely liberal RPG industry, supporting people who publish their own stuff that pushes boundaries, is maybe a little bit controversial. Have some kind of, badge or something to put on books to say, we don't give a fuck, leave us alone. Something similar for tables, like the opposite of an X card. A Y card. Why though? Or a GTFO card, something you can put on the table that says, this is not a safe space, this is a place to game. I am not your therapist. Fuck off. Something like that, and then people can choose to go and play wherever they want, however they want, which is how it should be anyway. So that's my suggestion. Just support creators who don't give a fuck. Give them your money. Maybe we need to find some alternative sales points that won't be used as a bludgeon to censor people with, and maybe we need a reply to X cards and things like that. I think the position of freedom and creativity inherently has it in it to win, and I think that seems to be what's happening in Comicsgate, though I would be very wary of genuine far-right people trying to copy and imitate what the pseudo-left has done in their entryism. People like Vox Day are toxic, stay well away from them. They just want to do the exact same thing, but from the far right. And fuck them too.